All right, here is the muscular system. So the muscular system, it takes up half of your body's mass, so a lot of your weight, if you ever step on the scale or anything like that, a lot of the weight that is making up your body is actually because of the mass of your muscles. Your muscles are very dense and they take up a lot of space as well as they have a lot of weight to them. The function for the muscles, it's to help with movement. So you'll see later we'll talk about different types of muscles, but you have your skeletal, your cardiac, and your smooth, and they all have something to do with some sort of movement in the body. And within a muscle, whichever type of muscle it is, there are elongated cells, and those cells are going to be called the muscle fibers, and multiple muscle fibers are going to make up a muscle tissue, which is your actual muscle. So in order for a muscle to work, we have to contract that muscle. And so the muscles are made up of, here's a nice diagram on the left here. The muscles are made up of two different types of protein. So we're going to be talking a lot about proteins when we refer to muscles. If you work out or anything like that, you might take like a protein supplement. And the reason you do that is to repair everything that you, or even to help build everything that you just worked on. So if you're lifting, you actually make these like small tears in your muscles, which is a fine thing if it's very small, but that's how your muscles get bigger. So those tiny little tears, when you take that protein powder, that protein supplement, are actually going to help to build them bigger then eventually. So the two protein fibers, you have myosin, which are the thicker filaments. So you can see right here, that's the orange, and there's little like nubs on the end of it. And then you have your actin, which are the thin, which in this case are your bluish filaments here. And so they alternate. You have the thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, and then your thin. And when they move across each other, so you can see there's separation right here. So what happens is they're actually going to get pulled over. These little heads here are going to grab on and actually move it across each other. So that's how the contraction is going to occur. Hopefully you remember some of the organelles that you learned back in biology, and there's something called smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum, and so there's actually a certain type of endoplasmic reticulum which is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that's actually going to be in the muscle fibers. And so you have calcium that is stored within those organelles. And then when a contraction needs to occur, that storage of calcium is then going to be released on demand, and then it allows for that contraction. So if you do not have enough calcium, your muscles aren't going to contract as much. And so that's why we need to always have a storage of calcium in our bodies. So how we cause a contraction, this is a nice diagram right here. You can find one in the book as well. So this is your muscle fiber down here at the bottom. That's what the myofibril is. And you can see those, like the red and blue lines, those are your actin and myosin filaments. So those are your proteins. And so what happens is this right here is like a motor neuron. Motor neurons are nerves in our bodies that help us to move. Motor is like the movement part. And so it doesn't come exactly in contact, but there's a space right here. It's called the synapse, or your synaptic cleft. And so where these two come together, the neuromuscular junction is literally where the neuron and the muscle come together. So the junction is where they form a connection. And all of these things have to be available for a muscle to contract. So you need ATP, which is the energy, you need Na+, which is sodium, you need K+, which is potassium, and you need Ca+, which is your calcium. If those are not there, and there's different levels of each that you would need, if those are not there, the muscle is not going to be able to contract. The way that we get ATP is through aerobic or anaerobic respiration. Aerobic, with air with oxygen, is the best way for us to get ATP. It's where we can generate the most. Anaerobic is without oxygen. That's basically the body's way of still making oxygen, still making ATP, even though not a lot of oxygen is available. If that happens, so if they can't keep up with the oxygen levels, let's say you're running in a race, running in a marathon, and you're using up more oxygen than your body can get, your muscles are obviously going to start to get tired, and they get very fatigued and they get sore. And so what that's called is lactic acid fermentation. And so that chemical lactic acid is going to build up, and then that's where you get your sore muscles from. So what I want you to do now, there is a video on Schoology. It says the number 2 and then steps of a contraction. And so I want you guys to pause this video and I want you to go and watch that. It's a video that kind of shows you obviously the steps of the contraction and kind of gives you a visual, because just reading through here you can't really visualize what it looks like. So go ahead and pause this, go back into Schoology and watch that video, and then you can write down these steps in your notes. All right, hopefully you had a chance to watch that video and you come back, and hopefully these steps are going to make a little bit more sense now that you saw that. So what happens is there's something called a neurotransmitter. What that is, it's basically a chemical that's going to start a reaction. And so that's going to get released from that neuron to the muscle through that little space called the synaptic cleft. And so that little chemical electrical signal is going to release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So a little electronic signal, and it's going to say, hey, you need to release some calcium. Boom, releases calcium. Then what happens is the calcium goes to the actin and myosin, and those little arms that you saw in the video, those are now available, and so they are going to start bonding to the sites on the actin. And it says it walks across, so it grabs it and moves it across, grabs another one, moves it across. And the reason we need ATP again is because it has to reset. So once that myosin head grabs, it's going to move, it needs to be able to release it and then go back and grab another one, so that contraction keeps happening. And this is happening like simultaneously. This is like over and over, like anytime a muscle is contracting, these 5 steps are just happening over and over again. All right, so the main reason we have muscles is from movement. Again, it just depends on what type of muscle we're talking. In the cardiac system, the cardiac muscle is obviously going to contract and pump blood through the heart and keep your heart beating. The smooth muscle is in your digestive system, and so it's going to contract and it's going to move food through your digestive system. Those types of muscles are involuntary, so you don't have to think about doing that. Your heart beats on its own and your food digests on its own. The only one that you really have control over and really think about are your skeletal muscles. And those are the ones that are attached to your bones. So that's the ones we're going to focus on right now. And there's an origin and insertion. We don't need to worry about that too much. It's basically just you have 2 points to a muscle. One's going to be the origin, literally where it originates, and then it's going to attach to another part within the skeletal system to allow for movement. So a couple movements and a couple terms that you want to know. Again, we're going to kind of like learn these in pairs like we've done before. And so this is the first of a pair. This is called flexion, and you've probably heard this before. If you just know the word flex, that's pretty much what it is. You're decreasing the angle of the joint. So you're bringing 2 bones closer together, and the joints that are involved are going to be like a hinge joint. So if you think of like your elbow or your knee, or a ball and socket joint like your hip or your shoulder. And the other pair to that would be extension. So the reason we pair it is because it's the opposite. And so you're going to increase the angle between the bones. If you hyperextend something, that means that it is an angle greater than 180. So if you look at the picture, if you have your head straight up, and if you bring your chin down, you are flexing it because you're decreasing the angle here. If you are bringing your head back up to the normal upright position, you would be extending it. If you bring your head back like you're looking up, is hyperextension because it's above 180. Some people can, if you're very flexible, you can almost, straighten your arm out and it can go further than 180 degrees. That would also be hyperextending. You can also get injured by hyperextending. It's not normal for a joint to go much further than 180 degrees. All right, the next one is abduction, abduction. You're moving the limb away from the midline. So the midline of the body, again, we're in anatomical position. Here's the midline, and you're moving your arm out. Could be like the fanning of your fingers and toes, and these are your ball and socket. This would be your hip, so either you're moving your leg out or your arm out like this. The opposite of that is adduction, adduction. The way that I think of this is, you're moving your limb towards the midline, so you're bringing it back. You are adding it back to your body. abduction, you're taking it away, like abduct, to be abducted by aliens or something. You're being abducted, you're abducting your arm away from your body. All right, rotation. So this has to do with moving around an axis. So your head is rotating because you cannot fully make your head go around in a circle. You can only make it go in a no motion. You can also rotate your leg. You can rotate it lateral, which means your foot is pointing out to the side, or medial, which means you're bringing it back to the midline. So rotation is not going around in a full circle. It is only going from side to side. Whereas circumduction, you are actually going around in a full circle. So what you can circumduct is like your arm. So like, in elementary gym class, you're like, okay, arm circles to warm up your arms. Well, that's what circumduction is. You are just bringing your arm around in a circle, and it's happening at the ball and socket joint. So the proximal end is still, again, proximal is closer to the attachment, and your distal end right here is what's moving in a circle. All right, you can have two movements of your foot. So you have dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. It's the up and down movement of your ankle. So it's bringing it, dorsi is like the backside of your foot. So dorsiflexion means that you are flexing, you're making this angle smaller. So dorsiflexion. Plantar, you're referring to the planting of your foot. So like the underside where you step. So plantar flexion, you are actually pointing your toes. These two right here are also movements at the ankle. If you've ever sprained your ankle, then this picture might hurt a little bit to look at. You have an inversion movement and an eversion. So again, from anatomical position, if your foot's just flat here, inversion means that it's going inward. So if you ever sprained your ankle this way, which is actually pretty popular, it would hurt on the outside because you're turning your foot in. Eversion is the sole of your foot is going out to the side, which is less common, but then it would hurt on the inside there. So inversion and eversion are movements of your foot. This is supination and pronation, mostly to do with the arm. I showed most of you this when we were back in class. It has to do with the radius and the ulna. So the reason that we're in anatomical position for the most part when we're looking at the skeleton is that these two bones are parallel when you're in the supine, meaning your palm is facing up. So anatomical position, your palm is always out, so that your ulna and radius are going to be parallel to each other. It's easier to show the bones that way. And then if you pronate your hand, so you're rotating it, it's actually rotating at the elbow, and the radius actually crosses over the ulna, and you can see here that they're crossed now. It's still, this is still thumb side, and this is still pinky side. The bones are still on the same side. They just cross in the middle. So supine pronation or supination, pronation are going to be movements, again, at the elbow, but it's referring to the way that your palm is. So supination, your palm is up, or if the body is in a supine position, it'd be face up. If the body is in a prone position, that means that the back side would be up, just like the back of your hand and your palm. And last but not least is called opposition. So those of us with opposable thumbs, that's what this is referring to. So it's used for grasping and manipulating, and it's simply being able to take your thumb and your pointer finger and bringing it together, to grab a pencil or to be able to manipulate and to grasp certain items that you would need. And that's it for the muscular system.